have a fantastic panel here of practitioners and people who really know their sauce, I think, on sustainability reporting. And I'm delighted to be able to speak with all of them. So I first of all want to just allow the panelists to say a few words about who they are and kind of how they fit into this subject matter here. We have a wonderful panel that is comprised of Sylvain Guillotin from EcoVadis, Senior Vice President of Research at EcoVadis, Marla Gowran Alvarez, who's Vice President of Sustainability at BDO Bank, Alinette Adig, who is the head of the ASEAN Regional Hub for GRI, and Cha Boon Chong, who is the Group Sustainability Director for Singtel. Welcome to all of you. I hope that I'm really looking forward to a fun session with you in the kitchen today, if you'll allow me to extend the metaphor. First of all, I want to give every panelist just a moment to tell us a little bit about your role and organization and share, your opening thoughts just on why reporting on governance is necessary from your perspective or experience. And I think we'll just go first of all to Sylvain. Please go ahead. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization?
Hello, Judy. Nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Sylvain Guillotin. I'm in charge of ratings and research at EcoVadis. EcoVadis is a global sustainability rating agency. We have about 1,000 employees in 14 offices throughout the world, and we rate about 30,000 companies per year on sustainability matters. Why reporting on governance is important? First of all, I think governance can mean different things in the world of sustainability. So I distinguish three types of ingredients. First of all, corporate governance, of course, and how board of directors are structured and how they function. So that's particularly important for publicly listed companies. But there is also the governance of sustainability itself and how the sustainability subject is approached and led in a company. For instance, is there a stakeholder committee to help educate and form the sustainability strategy of the company? And then sometimes also, especially in private companies, governance is associated with anti-corruption and compliance programs. So, I mean, as you imagine, all those three subjects are essential in making the sustainability policy and the company sustainable. And as a result, reporting on those ingredients is also critical. And, reporting is part and parcel of corporate responsibility. And as such, reporting on governance is not optional, in my opinion. So I think it's what is driving sustainability programs and actions. And so I think it's important for stakeholders to understand how it's structured in the company.
That's great. Thank you very much. Marla, why don't we turn to you next to introduce the subject and yourself?
Thank you, Judy. I hope everyone can hear me well. So let me talk about BDO Unibank first. It's the largest bank in the Philippines with the largest resources and capitalization, loan portfolio with over 40,000 employees nationwide and a network of more than 1,400 branches. I serve as VP and Sustainability Officer and head the Sustainability Office of the bank. In that role, I drive the execution of our sustainability framework and strategies, and in doing so, oversee policy formulation and program reviews related to sustainability across the BDO conglomerate. I'm also responsible for the annual sustainability report, monitoring, tracking, and reporting on the bank's environmental and social impact and initiatives. And in terms of local regulations. So I manage our transition plan in compliance with our Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, or Central Bank Circular on a Sustainable Finance Framework, where we oversee the transition of the bank in terms of embedding ENS criteria in our corporate governance, in our risk management systems, strategies, and overall operations. So practically everything that we do. And finally, I'm tasked to ensure that we communicate our sustainability initiatives to our internal and external stakeholders, including representing BDO in panels such as this, which is one of the things I really enjoy about the job. In terms of reporting on governance, and for banks in particular, I would echo actually what you said earlier, many of the things that you mentioned earlier, Judy. Because for us, it demonstrates integrity, transparency, and accountability in the bank's activities to stakeholders. It allows our leaders to reflect on our economic and financial, environmental, and social impact, both on our shareholders, our stakeholders, and vice versa on the bank itself. It also provides us a venue where we can highlight our best practices, which helps us attract key talents for the bank. It also helps us with investors in providing capital, and also in terms of gaining support from our customers. So for us, good governance plays a direct role in creating and keeping trust among our stakeholders. And BDO's excellent market reputation has been built on a solid foundation of an ethical corporate culture, responsible business conduct, underpinned by a very well-structured and effective system of governance. Something that we're actually very proud of as one of the consistent practitioners in the country and in the region.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Marla. Elinette, your turn.
Hi, Judy. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. I am Ali Adige. I am the head of GRI's ASEAN Regional Hub. So I don't know if I should still talk about the Global Reporting Initiative. I'm supposing that everyone knows about it. But for those who have not heard of us, or know very little of us, so GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, we are the pioneer of sustainability reporting. So before all of this alphabet soup of sustainability reporting framework standards came about, there was only GRI. And we came at a time when sustainability reporting was practically unheard of. And it's because it was the needs of the times, where there are a lot of, corporate misbehavior and scandals. So we thought that we thought that, it's high time to get companies to be accountable for their non-financial impacts. And so because of that, we are the provider of the gold standard for sustainability impact reporting, and we are committed to deliver the highest level of transparency for organizational impacts on the economy, environment, and people. So we are now the most widely used sustainability reporting standard out there, with majority of the Fortune 500 companies using the GRI. So with me, in my role as the head of GRI, ASEAN Regional Hub, so we promote our advocacy GRI's mission to promote sustainability reporting throughout the world through our regional hubs spread all over the world. And the youngest one among the hubs is the GRI ASEAN Regional Hub, which was established in 2018. And it was quite timely because compared to our counterparts in other regions in the world, sustainability reporting was just picking up when we established the hub in Singapore. So just to give you some idea, the oldest mandate for sustainability reporting in the region came from Thailand, which was around 2010. And the rest of the 5 other countries, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, and Malaysia, they've issued the mandate in the past 5 or 6 years. So there is increasing demand, there is increasing awareness on sustainability reporting in the region, and capability and promote adoption of GRI standards. Of course, we also facilitate access to GRI services, and we also create opportunities for peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. So throughout the year, we hold numerous events and engagements with different stakeholders. And as I mentioned, we just don't work with companies because sustainability is the responsibility of everyone. So we also work with market regulators, governments, capital markets, civil society, and other stakeholders. So going to your question, why is reporting on corporate governance important? So we're seeing in the past, years, corporations are increasingly under pressure for good governance and sustainability. And there is now, in fact, corporate governance and corporate sustainability is now becoming an emerging research area that explores the GRI standards itself. We've placed much importance on corporate governance. That's why it's GRI-2. So before companies can start reporting on the material topics, they should have their house in order, because corporate governance is the structure by which companies can be directed and controlled. So Judy mentioned the importance of corporate governance, because you cannot just say that you're committed to sustainability, and when it drills down to the details, you don't have the appropriate structures in place. And we've oft heard of the repeated phrase that what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. And to manage things effectively, there should be an effective sustainability governance, corporate sustainability governance in place, meaning the business and the structure, alignment between the business and the structure is important. And how company is governed and structured actually speaks to the level of commitment of the company to sustainability. So I'll just leave it there for now. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you, Ali. Boon Chong, your turn.
Yep.
Please go ahead.
All right. So I am definitely no stranger to GRI or sustainability reporting. So since 2010, I've been producing sustainability reports, annual ones. I've already produced 12. The first 5 on our Singapore operations, and then the last 7, Singapore as well as our Australian operations through our wholly owned subsidiary Optus in Australia. I remember that we started with G3, and then the following year G3.1, moved to G4, and then GRI standards. And of course, now we are preparing for the new 2021 standards. I thought I wanted to quickly mention this point about governance. I like what Judy mentioned, and also Sylvan. Traditionally, people always talk about governance in annual reports, about how the board is structured, the governance bodies and the various committees. I think people normally, they look at ESG in very discrete terms. E is E, S is S, and G is G. But I think, like you mentioned, climate change. So how do you govern climate change at a company level? So G is really, I think, would be the basic, the fundamental. And G is applicable to both E as well as S. But I think some people still look at these 3 topics as very discrete topics. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's a great point and a great start to the conversation. I've got a few discussion questions, and we'll just sort of have a conversation here and see where we get to. And please, just a reminder to the audience to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them in due course as much as we can. So I've got a discussion question here, which I've touched on a little bit in my comments, and so my views on some of it. But it's just to say that reporting on governance is often considered sensitive, certainly has that reputation. And I wanted to ask the panel, why is that? And do you agree? And how would you encourage people to see these kinds of disclosures as less challenging? And I think I want to first go to our corporate practitioners on this question, and then we'll get some comment from the others on it as well. So maybe Boon Chong, why don't you carry on for a couple of minutes? Your view on the sensitivity of governance disclosures.
Yeah, I think companies are a little wary because probably they're not there yet. I mean, we are not there yet. It's definitely a journey. So some things are very well governed, and some things are probably just starting out. and companies are not confident of reporting, those things that they have just started out or started to look at. And they probably will just focus the things that they are already doing and very well governed, and totally silent on the rest. And I think that would be very, very glaring. So I think companies should just come out front to say, hey, we know that there is a gap and we are working on it. I think that will put the company in a better position.
Great, thanks. And how about you, Marla? What's your view from as a practitioner?
It's because governance really requires the highest level of accountability. And there's also the legal and regulatory compliance aspect of it. So legal, we know because our board of directors are responsible for performing their duties. It's a fiduciary duty. And then compliance, because as banks, we are very heavily regulated. And so it's really to ensure that we are performing to sound practices, to ethical responsibilities, to responsible business conduct, that we are managing our risks most importantly. Those are really the key words when governance comes into play. For BDO, in particular, we put so much importance on it that one of our 5 sustainability strategies is actually the governance-based sustainability strategy. And this is to guarantee that all of the bank's initiatives are aligned with our business performance, that it's managed following principles of transparency and integrity and disclosure. And really just to show that governance in many ways would come first, and that aligns with having our board as primary oversight for all our sustainability initiatives. But for it to be challenging, honestly, I don't get that sense, because we have a very well entrenched approach to governance and public disclosures. And I can simply put it as one of our sayings that, everything that we disclose, everything that we say should be auditable. And that's really the guidance for the bank, for everyone in the bank.
That's great. Thank you very much. Ali, maybe as somebody who encourages the practice of sustainability reporting broadly, but also now quite specifically on strengthened and improved governance disclosures, what kind of questions and worries do you come across in your engagement with practitioners about this?
I can identify one in particular because I had this experience a couple of months back when I had this engagement with corporations in the region. We did a session on corporate governance and we touched the topic of remuneration. So there was a divergent perspective from the participant, and we see that when it comes to reporting on the remuneration, a lot of corporations are still not ready. And I think it's also not because they don't want to disclose it, but it also depends on the cultural context, in the country. Like for that webinar that I conducted, the C-suites in the audience, they were really concerned about putting it publicly, and anyone can see it, and they will be like the issue of kidnapping, of being extorted, all those things. But for GRI's part, because if you look at the GRI standards itself, we emphasize that we do not demand, we do not request, or we do not require companies to report on the actual figures. For some of the few things that that the GRI standards ask is to describe the process of designing the remuneration, and then of course if they could report on the ratio of the annual total compensation of the organization's highest paid individual. And I think in the broader context, relating it to the sustainable development goals. Why is this important? Because there are a lot of studies that has been released that the CEO to worker pay gap has since 1978 has increased by more than 1,000%, while a typical worker has only increased by 18%. So by showing the ratio of CEO to typical worker compensation, it also speaks of how the company is also contributing to the SDG 1, right? So if it really pays its regular employee fairly and justly. So yeah, so for my experience, that's one of the sensitive topics that corporations are they are sensitive to.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it's worth just being clear about this. People find money and conversations about money a bit embarrassing, right? Which is interesting, Sylvain, when they are trying to make the case to the financial markets for increased investment or continued investment. What's your view as someone who observes these practices and attempts to sort of improve the transparency to markets on these matters, as to why disclosures around governance broadly are considered sensitive, and should they be from your perspective?
No, it's a good question. I would say yes and no. For publicly listed companies, I think today they have no option but to report on their governance. Of course, there are variations in how well they report, and therefore there are ratings on corporate governance. But for publicly listed companies, I think there's no choice again. I think the next frontier is our private companies. I think EcoVadis, we mostly rate companies in supply chains. So 95% of companies we rate are private. And for some reasons, many of those companies don't consider that it's normal to report on their governance, on who owns the company to start with. And yet, if you think about sustainability being mitigating impact on stakeholders, the first thing the stakeholders want to know about a company is who owns the company, who governs the company. And in private companies, it's very difficult. And even more in Asia, I think there's less transparency in private companies. A lot of companies are family companies, and they consider that those matters are confidential. But when you function on a market, you cannot be totally disconnected from your stakeholders. So if your stakeholders are expecting you to explain who owns the company, you should be transparent. And how can you be credible when you explain your climate change policy or when you explain your working condition policy if you don't start by telling who owns the company to start with? So I think the next frontier is really to push governance in the private sector. I think it will be for their benefit, and it will be also for the benefit of their stakeholders.
Why don't we stay with that for a moment, Sylvain, because you specifically mentioned reporting in supply chains, and we did want to talk a little bit about this if we can. What I wanted to ask about is how should organizations be thinking about governance matters with respect to supply chains, how to be clear, how to create confidence in the information that they're providing about this, and to know for themselves that they are managing risk and doing the right thing with respect to those operations. Can you talk a little bit about that for a moment?
Yes, I think it's a very good question, because I think the first thing to know is that supply chain issues or sustainability issues in supply chains are very often a blind spot for board members. So they have a very little information in what's going on in supply chain, and yet sustainability issues in supply chains are very often the center of gravity of sustainability issues. It's not so much what's happening within the scope of your operations, but very often what's happening upstream in your supply chain. For instance, if you look at greenhouse gases, 70–80% of emissions are upstream in supply chains. And yet, board members tend to focus on the direct scope of the company operations. So I think it's a blind spot. I think there are some talks, particularly in Europe, to ask board members to report more on what they have done to look at the supply chain strategy, to have a special committee on supply chain stakeholders, for instance, because when you are a large publicly listed company in the sector of textile or in the sector of oil and gas, I think, again, it's important that board members have a zoom view on supply chain upstream and therefore have special committee and are able to engage with stakeholders in supply chain to better grasp what are the problems. So I think in the reporting standards, GRI included, now there are more items related to supply chain. It's still often anecdotal because not only in GRI, but in many reporting standards, very often it says you should report on accident or you should report on your energy consumptions and in supply chain. So it becomes a bit secondary and there's no specific topic for supply chain. So basically it's a blind spot for board members. It's kind of a blind spot for stakeholders. And yet it's where very often the most acute issues are forming. So I was talking about private company being the next frontier of governance, but I think supply chain and boards in publicly listed companies should also be on top of the agenda.
Boon Chong, what's your experience as a practitioner in terms of this relationship with the supply chain? How do you reflect it accurately? How do you make sure that your colleagues, your leadership are making good decisions and are well informed about this area?
I'll say that it's definitely a journey. I think supply chain is the most complex topic in my mind. Climate change is the most urgent, but I think supply chain is the most complex. I remember, I think it was G4, everything that the company discloses, all the indicators are all applicable to supply chain. So all the environmental, the social, the governance aspect, everything all applicable to the supply chain. But I thought that right now, probably not as prominent. I thought that the previous version was more prominent on supply chain. And I think that's where EcoVadis, that's where your value add is. Singtel as a supplier, I just submitted our survey, on your platform. So definitely supply chain is not an overnight, achievement, because there are so many suppliers out there globally. So we're working very closely with our group procurement and also looking at besides the governance. So no point just having, say, a supplier code of conduct. All the risk assessments, the audit, these are all the things that need to come along. So it's rather complex that we cannot tackle all at the same time, probably, or over a year. But I'd like to highlight the other point, because people always think suppliers, probably the companies will be thinking suppliers of goods, carbon emissions and whatnot. But I think like for Singtel, we do have suppliers of services as well. So for example, we do have contractors working on manholes, working on base stations, working on heights, ladders and whatnot. So I think, they are suppliers as well, So for this group, because they're performing high risk jobs for us on our behalf, going down to clients or customers' place to do all this installation. So we do have things like WSH, or workplace safety health training. We have our safety accreditation scheme, to make sure that they are all on par or up to a standard. And if they fail, we will actually not work with them anymore. So suppliers like that, in this particular group, they have to demonstrate that they are on board.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I want to ask Marla, just changing the subject slightly, what are the positives? Are there any positives relating to governance reporting? What's in it for your organization as a reporting organization? Do you have any thoughts about how you can make governance innovative and interesting in the context of sustainability reporting? Marla.
So I actually asked my colleagues, I asked around for their views on this. But although personally for me, I think the positive side is that it shows our board and senior leadership engagement and actual commitment, because we really see how they are passionately engaged when they discuss sustainability topics in board meetings and in board committee meetings. So for us to be able to share some of that in our governance reporting, I think is very interesting for stakeholders, because you tend to see board members as not really as individuals with their own advocacies, with their own opinions, or at least it's not visible to most of us. So that's one. The other one is it can potentially show how decisions are made high level, depending on the level of disclosure, of course, and how it's presented. But admittedly, in terms of innovation and making it more creative in presenting governance reporting, we are still at baby steps on that. We're trying to change the language a bit, for example, because traditionally it's very formal. It's regulatory language. So if we are able to make it a bit more conversational, so that it can appeal to the interests of our clients, of our customers at the bank, then it's something that can be more interesting and definitely provide a bit more insight on how the bank works and why they should be trusting the bank, because this is how leadership thinks and this is how leadership engages and commits.
I think that's a really interesting point and a reminder to to all of us, really, that reporting is it's not just about sort of measures of accountability. It's about having a conversation with your stakeholders, but also with your colleagues internally about what's important to the business and how do you actually sort of organize operations to make sure that the results that you generate are what you really want to come out of it. Ali, can I ask you a question, sort of in a similar vein? In your experience of these things, do boards actually read sustainability reports, and why or why not? How could or should the board and the chief sustainability officer work together to ensure that reports are reflective, and compelling in terms of the integration of ESG strategy topics, themes alongside the business strategy and disclosure? Thoughts on that?
Okay, thanks, Judy, for that question, and I'll try to answer that question carefully. So, to answer that, I will speak about where Southeast Asia is it right now. As I mentioned, some jurisdictions are still quite young when it comes to sustainability reporting. So you would know that the board is involved and hopefully reads the sustainability report. If you look at their sustainability report, there is an effective sustainability governance in place, meaning sustainability is a concern, is part of a board committee. They have, a head of sustainability, whether it's called CSO or it's being performed by other C-suite functions. So that is to answer your question. But the thing is, because in Southeast Asia, and I think even in other jurisdictions, what happened was that even before companies have establish an effective sustainability governance in place, they were first required to do a sustainability report. So it was like doing, putting the cart before the horse. So before they, they reorganized the organization, what they did was they looked at the E and the E and the S first. So, do we have energy saving programs? Do we have water saving programs? Or, do we train our employees? And then after, looking at what they're doing piecemeal, and then after that first exercise, then they realize, oh yes, for us to do this sustainably and for the long term, then we have to put effective governance structure in place. But the good news is that we're seeing the growth of awareness among boards in Southeast Asia. But if you ask me if we were there yet, I don't think so. But we're hoping that we will get there in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. It is a process. I mean, we've been hearing this from all of you, really, that there's a journey involved in this, and I think it's really important for us to remind ourselves that none of this, no one has ever started right from the beginning with the finished product on this. It really is something that everyone needs to not just get accustomed to, but to develop the capabilities to reflect on well. And it is very much a dialogue process, I think, with stakeholders. I want to ask all of the panelists at this point to say a little bit about what evidence do you see that this reporting really makes a difference, for the planet, for businesses, for markets, or for stakeholders? Sylvain, do you want to go first on that one? Where do you see this kind of reporting actually making a difference from your perspective?
So I think, like it was said by Boon Chong, I think sustainability is a journey. And in this journey, in this cycle, at some point, you need to report to your stakeholders. And you see that it works when, then you become more educated and you have a better conversation with your stakeholders as a result of good reporting. And then you form better policy, and from better policy to better actions, and then next cycle, better reporting. So I think it's part of the cycle, and we see, we rate, as I said, we rate about 30,000 companies per year. A lot of those companies are being rated on an annual basis. And then the quality of reporting is one of the ingredients in the rating. And we see clearly that it's part of the maturity journey. And when company start getting a good score on reporting, we see that the next reassessment, they will also improve on all other matters, policy, actions, special programs. So I think it's a mechanism to kind of force you to report to your stakeholders that will put you in a cycle of improvement. And it's like any other matters, and when you're trying to, for instance, to reduce your greenhouse gases, then you have a target, then you put in place actions in line with those targets. Then at some point you need to measure the progress, and then you need to report internally to the teams involved in that so that they can, re-engage in a new cycle of improvement. So I think reporting is essential. If you don't do that, it will stop the cycle of improvement. And I think we clearly see, that it works when we rate companies one year after another.
Brilliant. How about your view, Marla?
Well, for me, I think the best proof that reporting makes a difference is in feedback. I also come from a communications background, by the way, echoing the earlier discussions, which helps a lot. And in terms of feedback, it's really in how other companies, other banks, academic institutions, and individuals have reached out to me in terms of, one, knowing more and learning from what BDO is doing. Sometimes they would ask for more details and consult, which I do offhand, just to really show that we are opening in terms of collaborating. Which leads me to the second point. They reach out to partner with BDO for sustainability projects or studies or best practices, or for us to speak at forums. Or sometimes they simply email to say that they're proud of what their bank is doing for people, for the environment, and for the country. So it has an emotional component as well, because this is a field that has advocacy in how we do it. It's not just because it's required, it's mandated by the central bank, but it's because there's an advocacy for us here. We see it as the bank's advocacy. So to me, that means that people see that we are really living up to who we are as a bank. And that is, we find ways to create a sustainable future for everyone, particularly for the Philippines, where we are based.
Thank you. Ali, what's the evidence to you that this reporting makes a real difference?
I will qualify my answer. I will say that the evidence of mandating sustainability reporting makes a difference, at least in my work here in the region, because as I said, it's quite new in the region. And before sustainability was mandated in this part of the world, only very few countries were reporting voluntarily, and they were reporting voluntarily not because out of the goodness of their heart, but there are some external, factors that also influence to report. Like, for example, their institutional investors are requiring it. So it wasn't gaining ground. But once the regulators did issue the mandate, like, for example, in the Philippines, it was only issued in 2019, effective 2020. And according to the Securities and Exchange Commission, from less than 20% reporting, it jumped to 95%. So imagine that. But again, getting companies to report and making sure that they are accurately reporting is another thing. But that is where you start. As you mentioned, Judy, it is a process, and getting them to report is where it starts. And through that awareness that sustainability is important, and that it is also good for them, they go through the process, they become more aware, and then eventually you get the buy-in that they're doing it genuinely. And then another importance of sustainability reporting, other than keeping track of the company's performance, also on the broader aspect, regional wise or country wise, there was an SCAP report, UN SCAP report, which says that Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, is lagging behind for most of the SDGs. I think we're only, on target on the SDG on innovation, but because we know that innovation is being led by the private sector, and they're infusing money in there. But for the most part, we are lagging behind, and in some SDGs we're even negative. And why is that? SCAP identified two reasons. One is that there's not enough financing being funneled to SDGs, and the other one is lack of accurate and reliable data, meaning there's not enough reports, so not enough companies are producing it. So, and it's interconnected, because if there's not enough reports showing, which SDGs need investment or being heavily invested, then how would financial institution know where to channel financing? So, yeah, that's my take.
Great point. Boon Chong, how about your view on the proof of the pudding in the eating, as it were?
Yep. I think besides reporting, it is actually the target setting and the reporting of the achievements. Say, like, we set 5-year targets, and how are we tracking on that? I think that is key. Because all these targets, besides addressing stakeholders' concerns, because they are material topics thanks to GRI, I think they are also used to set management incentives, and that will align the entire company's move towards sustainability. I think that is important.
Thank you so much. Elaine is going to help us with maybe a couple of questions to see what might be on the audience's mind. Elaine, is there anything that you'd like to put to any of the panels here?
I think it was Marla who actually alluded to the fact that, there's not a lot of visibility of board members in sustainability reporting. And with this increase in focus and emphasis on governance and on the role of the board of directors, and we've heard so much about that, and on the new governance reporting requirements in the universal standards and in other frameworks, is it time to sort of out the board in sustainability reporting? Is it time to have the board members in the report quoted, showing, expressing their views? Is there an expectation that in sustainability reporting we'll meet the board members and sort of get to understand a little bit better who they are and, what their position is on driving sustainability through the organization? Judy, perhaps you'd like to direct that question to the panelists or answer it.
Well, I'd love to just see who has a view on that. Sylvain, would you like to have a go at that one?
No, I will bring a slightly different angle, Hélène. I think there is a growing movement in North America and in Europe, in particular, of what we call so-called benefit corporations. So companies whose main mission is to improve social and environmental matters, and that are also at the same time for profit. And for those companies, the board members, they look at both the financial performance and the sustainability performance. They have no other choice. And in fact, at EcoVadis, we have 4 main objectives at the board level: financial, employee, customers, and planet and society. And so those 4 objectives are at the same level and are looked by the board members. And I think more and more companies are going to become some kind of benefit corporations. And therefore, the board members will have to look at sustainability performance and objective with the same importance than the financial ones. Because if you only focus on the EBITDA or the revenue, we know from experience that it's not sustainable. So I think slowly but surely, I think there's going to be a shift, and board members are going to become, I think, very focused on those matters.
And should sustainability reports and disclosures include the board members? Should we know who the board members are? Should we be able to see them? Photos? Should we hear from them in sustainability reporting? I think that was the question. We know it's important to them. Should they be in person telling people that in reporting?
Yeah, I think so, because they are the one governing the company. So if the company has a lot of impact on many stakeholders, the least they can do is to tell stakeholders who they are. So for me, that's kind of obvious. And again, it's accepted in publicly listed companies. It's part of regulatory kind of requirements. But the next frontier is, that private companies, especially the ones that have a significant footprint, social or environmental, take the habit of, presenting who they are, who owns the company, who governs the company, because the stakeholders need to know who they are talking to.
Yeah. I mean, I think on this point as well, we're talking specifically about board members here, but I make this point frequently. But I really think it's essential to recognize that you might be thinking as a sustainability reporter that you are producing your report for the purposes of particular audiences. That you might be talking to investors, you might be talking to thought leaders or the media or somebody. Most of the time, your single largest actual audience is your own employees. These are the people who understand the business much, much better than any other audience would. and will reflect on the contents through the lens of their own experience. So they will know, do I actually know who the board members are? Do I believe that there really is that commitment? Do I see it from day to day in my own experience? I think this is it's actually a risk for organizations not to reflect on that reality as they are reporting and as they're talking about some of these very slightly challenging questions of governance that need to be brought into the conversation. I wonder if any of the other panelists would like to say a word about that, Marla or Boon Chong or Ali. Any thoughts on that?
I would say absolutely. Employees should be the strongest and most trustworthy ambassadors of companies, not just when it comes to sustainability, but everything that a company presents itself as standing for. So it's very important that employees have a high awareness of the company's leadership and where they stand in terms of sustainability practices. And in our case, we actually do promote it as a sustainable mindset for everyone. Everyone is encouraged to practice it at the office, professionally, and at home, to bring those values with them at home and share it with their family members and friends. And there is much work to do there. Like in our case, we have 40,000 employees nationwide. So it is a massive undertaking to get everyone at the same level of awareness and commitment. But starting with knowing who your leaders are and knowing who they champion or represent, and maybe even, Elaine, to answer your question, maybe at some point, it's something that board members can be sponsors of or champion. Like if we have a board director who's a chair of WWF in the Philippines, so he has that perspective coming in. That's part of the value that he brings to the board. And we have another board member who says that he supports and champions diversity, gender diversity, and gender equality. So maybe somewhere along the way, if that can be articulated and communicated as well, I don't know if as a requirement or as part of overall disclosures for governance, then I think that should help a lot.
Wonderful, Rajesh.
So
is there a final question that you'd like to raise? I think we only have a moment left in this session.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Sylvain said and Marla is saying. So you see, when it comes to publicly listed companies, I think they are sorted because there's a regulation and even GRI, the new standards, they now have the both reports should be published together, like your financial annual report and sustainability report, and the timing is important. And in Singapore, for example, companies, boards have the responsibility to decide what are the material ESG factors, and there has to be a board statement in the sustainability report. Those who follow integrated reporting framework, the whole framework is around getting the board involved in the value creation process and a board statement and so on. So I think if you're talking about listed companies, I see that there's a critical mass and they are doing things where the board cannot hide from their sustainability responsibilities. That's no longer possible. The issue is with private companies, what Sylvain said, because they are under the radar. And that's where most of publicly listed companies' impacts, risks, and opportunities are. And those are hidden and they're not required by law to disclose who runs those companies and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a big challenge, that how we are going to address that. When it comes to sustainability reporting, a lot of these private companies, they very conveniently mention that we are a private company and we are not required by law. They don't even want to disclose their revenue figures. How much is their revenue? because they are private. They are not required to disclose that. They are sensitive to that. So forget the rest of the board and structure and all. So I think I agree with Sylvain that that's the next frontier for governance, because without fixing governance in the supply chain, you cannot fix a lot of these big problems that we are talking about, whether it's climate change, decarbonization, net zero, or human rights, or et cetera, et cetera. We can't fix that until and unless we find a way to spice up the G in ESG among smaller companies and private companies. Sheffield.
Well, I think this has been an amazing discussion. Thank you so much, Judy, for your insights earlier and for leading this discussion all about the the importance and the challenges and the sensitivities of governance disclosure. And I'm really sure we'll be seeing a lot more depth, breadth, scope, new ingredients and new recipes going forward.